So God put on the body armor, the breastplate of righteousness, and placed on his head the helmet of salvation. And as you read on in the words of Isaiah, he goes on to describe the fact that God is going to send a Savior. That he's going to send the Messiah. And that he's going to be the one who delivers the oppressed. So the armor is of God. It's not of us. It's nothing of us. So I hope you get that. But I need to say something else here. I want you to pray for me, because this message has got a lot, folks. You're going to see some things you've never seen before. This has been a really tough week for me. We've had a lot of confusion this morning, and I can tell you right now, it's nobody's fault. Not only is the armor of God and nothing of us, but I also want to say, you can fill this in your outline, the enemy is more crafty than he is discreet. The devil, the enemy, who has agents called demons or evil spirits, is not real discreet about what he does. He doesn't use discretion. He uses craftiness. Remember, we learned last week that Lucifer was the shining light. Before he fell, he reflected all the colors of the rainbow to the glory and honor and praise of God. That was his responsibility. So he's a creature of light. So we find that he's crafty, he's alluring. Look at the Garden of Eden. What did he do with Eve? He allured her. Did God really mean what he said? We see it right there in the book of Genesis. Let me show you how crafty the enemy really is. Have you ever read the Old Testament account of when the children of Israel got into the Promised Land in Canaan? I remember growing up as a boy singing that hymn, "On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I'm bound for the Promised Land." And they taught me all my life growing up that was about heaven. The hymn writer knew what he was talking about. We just didn't look carefully at the words. Ladies and gentlemen, when the children of Israel, through the leadership of Joshua, finally entered Canaan, the Promised Land, where the wells had already been dug, and the houses had already been built, and the crops had already been planted, the land of milk and honey, it's not talking about heaven. Question: are there giants in heaven? Are there enemies in heaven? Are there armies in heaven? If you read about Canaan, when the children of Israel got into Canaan, the Promised Land, the land of milk and honey, they encountered 7 different nations who had warrior soldiers who came against them. God was painting us a picture of the fact that in Jesus Christ, we have all the promises of God in Him, which are yes. But there's a battle involved in seeing them all come true. That's why there's such war when you walk with God. This is not a statement of self-righteousness, it's a statement of reality. My wife and I just don't know any longer what it's like not to be in a war. They never stop moving. That's why Paul said we ought to be weary in the work, but not weary of the work. Sometimes we just get weary. Sometimes we get tired praying. Sometimes we get tired because we don't see the answers come. When we depend on the promise of God, when we think they ought to come, then we have to remember that God is always on time and that God is never late, Dave. God is never late.
Amen.
Let me ask you this question. Who was it that ruled Germany during World War II? You can talk back to me. Who ruled Germany during World War II? Did Everybody say Hitler.
Amen.
Who wanted to rule the world during World War II?
Yep.
You got the right name. But it wasn't really him.
Satan.
It wasn't him. You saw a man possessed by the devil who is the one who wants to rule the world. A man filled with evil spirits who wanted to kill, murder, and destroy.
Amen.
What comes out of the mouth starts in the heart. And when you're watching the news, regardless of which network you choose, when you hear Ahmadinejad or any of these other guys talk, and when evil words come out of their mouth, they're just letting you know whose side they're on.
Amen.
They're just letting you know under whose control they are. When I was traveling years ago, right after my wife and I married, I had been pastoring a large First Baptist church. And we had a radio ministry, and the Lord blessed that church. But we began to see the enemy beginning to destruct families. We began to see the rise in the divorce rate, which today, is now over 50%. And it's no different in the church. In fact, I heard the other day there are more divorces among church members than there are people who aren't church members. It's like 52% or something. And I just got this burden for the family. We prayed together. I said, honey, and I've been preaching around a few places, and I had some messages on the family that God had given me. So I began to travel, and I resigned the pastorate, and we moved to Houston. And I remember I was gone 41 days one time, preaching all of the United States. And I was preaching on the family. That was what I felt that I was called to do. And a friend of mine who was on my board at that particular time told me, he said, Buster, he said, I've got this friend I met years ago who's coming to see me. He said, you need to meet this fella. And he said, I want him to meet you because he said, I want him to interview you. My friend didn't tell me who he was until I met him. And you understand this is over 30 years ago. It turns out that this man, during World War II, was a newspaper reporter who was embedded with the troops fighting the Germans. And through a series of events, he somehow, by the sovereignty of God, I would say, got his foot in the door, and he interviewed Adolf Hitler and did an article about it. And I said, well, this guy met Adolf Hitler. I thought, man. So I said to him, I said, I've only got one question for you, sir. I said, what was he like?